Hello and welcome to this video in which we will sew together the Nikko Care product patterns for the bathroom. The goal is to create simple and effective sewing projects including a headband, wristbands, as well as a face pad and a soap pouch. All these products are made with an absorbent fabric such as terry cloth or waffle jersey combined with cotton fabric. The headband allows you to apply makeup, remove makeup, or massage your face. It fastens and unfastens with hook and loop fastener. The wristbands are made of absorbent fabric and are elasticated for easy wear. They help prevent water from running down your arms when cleansing your face. The face pad is designed as a small, thumb-free mitt that can be easily slipped on to cleanse the face. Finally, the soap pouch allows you to store or transport your products without staining your toiletry bag. It can then be easily washed in the machine by turning it inside out. The soap pouch closes with a double cotton twill cord to tie or optionally with an elastic loop and a button. All the seams of these products are unclosed between the fabric layers to ensure a neat finish. The sewing level is easy. The 4 products have no difficulty and are quick to sew. Regarding the fabrics to use, each of the 4 projects requires 2 types of fabric. The first is an absorbent fabric, such as terry cloth or waffle fabric woven or knitted. If your terry cloth or waffle jersey is thin, as in this case, it is recommended to interface the back with a thin fusible interfacing or a thin fusible padded interfacing. This will help provide some structure to the fabric and, most importantly, prevent it from distorting during sewing. The second recommended fabric is a cotton fabric such as poplin, seersucker, or chambray. Linen can also be used, but cotton poplin is more tightly woven and easier to work with on small surfaces like these. Linens are generally loosely woven and tend to fray easily, which can make sewing small pieces more difficult. Additionally, for the soap pouch, you can use a coated cotton fabric such as flexible oilcloth. Since the pieces to be sewn are small, fabric scraps can be used or old terry towels can be repurposed. If you choose to use a regular cotton fabric for the exterior of the soap pouch, you can optionally add a PUL fabric or waterproof polyester fabric between the layers of terry cloth and cotton. However, this is entirely optional. When a solid soap is only slightly damp inside the terry cloth pouch, it will dry quickly as the fabric absorbs the moisture. For the headband, you will need a piece of hook and loop fastener measuring 3 centimeters wide by 7 centimeters long. For the wristbands, you will need 50 centimeters of a 4 centimeters wide elastic. For the solid soap or shampoo pouch, you will need either 60 centimeters of a 2 centimeters wide cotton twill ribbon or 10 centimeters of a round elastic cord and a button of approximately 15 millimeters. In the case of thin and lightweight terry cloth, a fusible interfacing should be added to the back. Plan for 20 centimeters of thin fusible interfacing. This interfacing can be a thin fusible padding or a thin fusible fabric. For the wristbands, avoid padding and opt for thin fusible interfacing instead. Regarding sewing supplies, the projects are entirely sewn with a standard sewing machine. There is no need for a serger, as all seams are enclosed. For sewing tools, you will need regular scissors or a rotary cutter to cut the fabric pieces, small precision scissors for finishes, pins or clips, and needles suited to your fabric. I recommend universal size 90 needles. A safety pin will be needed for making the wristbands. Finally, polyester thread is recommended for its durability. We have made different versions, which I will now present to you. We start with a set made of thin, very soft white terry cloth combined with Ikate's Babylon poplin. The headband, wristbands, face pad, and soap pouch are matching. We made 2 versions of the soap pouch, one with an elastic cord and a button, and the other with a fastening made of ecru cotton twill ribbon. We interfaced the terry cloth with G700 interfacing to make the fabric more stable while keeping it flexible. We also have a small version made with striped seersucker, once again combined with white terry cloth. For the soap pouch, we chose to use a white round elastic cord and a button. Here too, I used a very thin interfacing to stabilize the terry cloth. We have cut our pieces, and there are only a few. For the headband, there are two identical pieces, one in poplin, one in thin terry cloth. I will interface the terry cloth with a thin interfacing or a thin fusible padding like H630, so in this case, there is a third piece for interfacing, but this is optional. For the wristbands, there are two identical pieces in terry cloth. Optionally, for thin terry cloth, there are two pieces of thin interfacing for added stability. For the face pad, there are two pieces, one in poplin and one in terry cloth, plus one optional interfacing piece for the terry cloth. For the soap pouch, there are two identical pieces, one in poplin and one in terry cloth, plus one optional interfacing piece if needed. I will therefore optionally interface the back of the thin terry cloth pieces with an interfacing. Terry cloth is a stretchy knit that tends to loosen easily, so to maintain some structure and prevent deformation, interfacing is ideal. To prepare the fabric, I will gently compact the terry cloth by shaking it lightly with small wrist movements. Then, I will place the glue side of the interfacing on the back of the terry cloth. I will fuse it using a hot iron without steam. If using fusible padded interfacing, I will place a piece of cotton poplin between the iron and the padding to avoid damaging it. For the wristbands, I will also interface them with a thin interfacing. Padded interfacing is not recommended for the wristbands because the elasticated pieces would end up too thick. Finally, I will do the same for one of the terry cloth pieces of the face pad and the terry cloth piece of the solid soap pouch. We will now transfer the marks. First, the position of the hook and loop fastener. It should be placed on the left end of the headband on the right side of the poplin, and on the right end of the headband on the right side of the terry cloth. If marking the terry cloth with a fabric pen is difficult, you can use pins or basting thread tied in a simple knot to indicate the hook and loop fastener positions on both sides. Finally, we will mark the opening notches on the soap pouch and on the terry cloth piece of the face pad. We start with the headband. Here, my terry cloth is thin and soft, so I've interfaced the wrong side with iron-on interfacing. Here's the result. I'll also show you a version with thin iron on wadding interfacing. This allows for elasticity. Both versions are fine. It all depends on the desired result. For thicker sponges, there is no need for interfacing. I now line up the fabric and sponge pieces with right sides together. I pin all around. Leave an opening of about 15 centimeters unsewn. I mark it with pins as shown on the pattern piece. I can then stitch all around 1 centimeter from the edges. We place the poplin fabric underneath, so the terry cloth with its interfacing remains visible under the presser foot. We start stitching along the marked length, beginning with a few back and forth stitches, then continue with a straight stitch. A pointed tool can help flatten the layers before they pass under the presser foot. At the start of a curve, we lower the needle into the fabric, lift the presser foot, and slightly pivot the fabric to follow the curve. Then, we lower the presser foot again and sew about 2 stitches before repeating the process. Lower the needle, lift the foot, pivot, lower the foot, and continue stitching in this manner until reaching the next curve. When we reach the second mark, we finish the seam with a few reinforcement stitches. Now we will trim the seam allowance, except at the opening. At the beginning and end of the opening, we will clip small notches. For the curved areas, we will clip V-shaped notches to allow for a smooth and neat finish when turning the headband right side out. Now we will turn the piece right side out by passing the fabric through the opening left unsewn. Then, using a long pointed tool or a pair of scissors, we will gently push out the curves to ensure a well-defined shape. Finally, we will fold in the seam allowances by 1 centimeter at the opening, pin them in place, and then press with an iron to secure the folds before closing the opening. We will finish by top stitching with a straight stitch along the opening to close it. Optionally, we can also top stitch around the entire headband at 2 or 3 millimeters from the edge. For this, I use a thread matching the fabric in the spool and a thread matching the terry cloth in the bobbin for a seamless look. Let's start with back and forth stitches at the beginning and end of the seam. If you're getting more comfortable with sewing curves, you can go a bit faster. Now we need to attach the hook and loop fastener. First, cut a hook and loop fastener strip measuring 3 centimeters wide by 7 centimeters long. Optionally, round the corners using precision scissors. Separate the 2 hook and loop fastener pieces. The soft side is placed on the woven fabric, on the left, aligned with the marks. The hook side is placed on the terry cloth side on the right. Each hook and loop fastener piece should be centered and placed 2 centimeters from the end of the headband. Pin them in place through all fabric layers. We recommend checking that the hook and loop fastener is correctly positioned on your head, as it may need to be adjusted slightly depending on the circumference of your head. The adjustment is made at this point. For example, here the position of the hook and loop fastener is okay, but on another person, the band could be shifted by 2 to 3 centimeters as the head circumference will be smaller. Once the hook and loop fastener position is finalized, top stitch around the edges of each piece to secure them. First, thread the machine with a spool thread matching the hook and loop fastener and a bobbin thread matching the fabric. Start with a few back and forth stitches to secure the seam, then stitch along the shape of the hook and loop fastener, keeping 2 millimeters from the edge. Finish with a few back and forth stitches. Repeat the process for the other hook and loop fastener piece. The stitching is complete. Your headband is now finished. We will now make 2 elasticated wristbands in terry cloth. First, measure the wrist circumference using a flexible measuring tape. Here, I get 17-18 centimeters, but it doesn't need to be extremely precise. If a measuring tape isn't available, a piece of thread or cord can be wrapped around the wrist, marked, and then measured against a rigid ruler. Once the wrist measurement is taken, we will cut an elastic strip 4 centimeters longer, 1 centimeter at each end for ease, and 1 centimeter at each end for the seam allowance. In my case, the measurement is 18 centimeters plus 4 centimeters equal 22 centimeters. I cut 2 identical elastic strips of 22 centimeters each, one for each wristband. Take one of the terry cloth wristband pieces and press a 1 centimeter fold on the wrong side at one end using an iron. Pin it in place to hold the fold. Sew with a straight stitch at 1 centimeter, securing the seam with back and forth stitches at the beginning and end. Repeat the same process for the second wristband. Now fold the band lengthwise, aligning the 2 long edges right sides together. Pin along the edge to hold the layers in place. Sew with a straight stitch 1 centimeter from the raw edges. Start with back and forth stitches. Due to the fabric thickness, the presser foot needs to be stabilized and positioned horizontally. To do this, place either a shim behind the presser foot or fold some fabric scraps to lift the back of the foot. This prevents the machine from stitching in place and allows smooth forward movement. Sew with a straight stitch 1 centimeter from the edge, progressing carefully. Use a pointed tool to flatten any creases that may form under the presser foot due to the terry cloth thickness. Finish with back and forth reinforcement stitches at the end. The stitching is complete. Now press the seam open with an iron. Then, press again so that the seam is positioned at the center of the band. Next, trim the seam allowances at both ends to reduce bulk. Now, we will turn the band right side out by using a safety pin inserted into the open end. The safety pin will help guide the fabric as we pull the band through. Continue pulling until the wristband comes out through the other end. If necessary, you can iron it again. Then, take the safety pin and attach it to one end of the elastic. Thread the elastic into the band from one end, moving it through until you reach the other side. Secure the other end of the elastic with a pin, leaving about 4 centimeters of elastic visible outside. Next, carefully pull the end of the elastic through the other side of the band, gently gathering the terry cloth as it is longer than the elastic. Secure this end with a pin as well. Ensure that both elastic ends are outside the band, and check that the elastic hasn't twisted inside the band. Once everything is in place, overlap the ends and pin them. Finally, top stitch the two ends together to secure the elastic. Position the presser foot inside the wristband to stitch comfortably without obstruction. As always, start and finish with back and forth stitches. Sew 2 parallel lines of stitching to secure the elastic ends and finish the wristband. Now, take the raw edge of the terry cloth wristband and tuck it under the folded seam of the other end. Secure it in place with a few pins. Then, top stitch through all layers to hold everything together and close the wristband. That's it. I've stitched it. Now, stretch the elastic and then release it. This will allow the elastic to be evenly distributed, creating nice gathers in the terry cloth. Optionally, you can add a few back and forth stitches in the middle of the wristband and through all layers. This will help prevent the center seam from twisting during machine washing. Just repeat the steps to create the second wristband. I've already done that myself. There you go, your 2 wristbands are now finished and can be washed in the machine. We will now sew the face pad, which consists of 3 pieces. 2 pieces of terry cloth and 1 pocket piece, which allows the pad to be used like a small mitt. On my end, I have interfaced the back of one of the terry cloth pieces because my terry cloth is very soft and thin, and I want to give it some structure to make it easier to sew with the poplin. We begin by folding the fabric piece in half, wrong sides together. Then, use the iron to press the fold in place. Next, align the raw, rounded edges of the fabric piece right sides together with the edges of one of the absorbent fabric pieces, in this case, the interface terry cloth. Then, place the second piece, right sides together as well, aligning the raw edges and sandwiching the pocket fabric in between. Pin around the entire perimeter. Now we will sew, leaving an opening at the bottom of the face pad between the 2 rounded edges, following the marks on the pattern. After a few back and forth stitches, start sewing from one of the marks. At the first right angle corner, leave the needle planted in the fabric, lift the presser foot, pivot the work 90 degrees, and lower the presser foot to continue sewing. Use a pointed tool to flatten the terry cloth and avoid small folds forming under the presser foot. When you reach the start of the curves, plant the needle in the fabric, lift the presser foot, and slightly pivot the work to follow the curve. Lower the foot and sew about 2 stitches before repeating the process. Plant the needle, lift the foot, pivot, and lower the foot to continue sewing, moving from one curve to the next. Keep sewing until you reach the second marking, then finish the seam with a few back and forth stitches. We will now trim the seam allowance by removing half of the seam allowance, except at the opening, by notching at the beginning and end of the opening. At the corners, trim at an angle close to the stitching. For the curved areas, make V-shaped notches to ensure a clean finish when turning the work right side out. Next, turn the work right side out by pulling everything through the opening. Use a long pointed tool or a pen to gently push out the curves, being careful not to distort the absorbent fabric. Finally, fold in the seam allowances at the opening and press to prepare for stitching to close the opening. Now, press the entire piece with an iron, making sure to press the 1 centimeter seam allowance at the opening. Once pressed, pin the seam allowances in place to secure them before stitching. We will finish by top stitching with a straight stitch through all layers on the section to close, starting and ending with a few back and forth stitches. Personally, I avoid stitching all the way around as the terry cloth can slightly distort at the curves. There you go, your face pad is now finished. It's practical and can be machine washed after use. To start the solid soap pouch, align the two pieces right sides together. On my side, I have interfaced the terry cloth on the back to give it some structure, as it is light and soft. Align the terry cloth and fabric at their right edges and pin them together. If you want to add a waterproof lining such as PUL fabric or thin waterproof nylon, now is the time to do so. Align the right side of the waterproof fabric with the wrong side of the terry cloth. Then, pin through all 3 layers. This waterproof layer is not essential. It will make your pouch fully waterproof if your soap or shampoo bar is very wet. But honestly, if it's just a little damp, there's a very low chance your outer pouch will get wet. Once everything is pinned, sew with a simple straight stitch, starting and ending with a few back and forth stitches. Now that it's stitched, we will press the seam with an iron before turning the work right side out and laying it flat with the right side visible. Be careful if you're using a waterproof fabric, which will likely be made of polyester or polyamide. You should place a cotton fabric between the iron and the seam allowance to avoid damaging the nylon fabric with the heat. Next, we will fold the seam along the line formed by the 2 marks on the right side of the printed fabric. You can hold it in place with pins like this. Then fold the seam again at the top marks. Fold down the sponge and the PUL if using to the bottom marks. Fold again to finish aligning the top edges and rounded corners with right sides together. Pin the sides and top. At the top, mark the unsewn section that will form an opening for turning the work inside out later. You can also insert the closure ties for the pouch here. All that remains is to stitch from the opening marked to the bottom on each side. Set the stitch length to 3 on your machine. Then, sew 1 centimeter from the raw edges, starting with a few back and forth stitches at one of the marks. At the start of the curves, plant the needle into the fabric, lift the presser foot, and slightly pivot the work to follow the curve. Lower the foot, sew about 2 stitches, then repeat the pivoting process. Plant the needle, lift the foot, pivot, then lower the foot to continue sewing. If you encounter a lot of thickness at the terry cloth areas, don't hesitate to place a shim or a folded fabric scrap under the presser foot to keep it horizontal. If the foot is too high, it may not feed the fabric properly, and the fabric could get stuck. The presser foot needs to be stabilized. When you reach the bottom, finish with a few back and forth stitches. Repeat the process at the second marking and finish the seam with more reinforcement stitches. You should now have an open area of 6 centimeters at the top of the pouch with the rounded edges still unstitched. We will now trim the seam allowance, except at the opening, by notching at the beginning and end of the opening. At the rounded corners, you can make V-shaped notches to help achieve a clean finish when turning the pouch right side out. Next, we will turn the work right side out through the opening left. Carefully shape the corners using your fingers, a pointed tool, or a pen. Then, press with an iron, making sure the seam allowances are well formed at the top, especially at the flap area. We can now create the flap tie for our pouch. Here's the first option. Cut 2 strips of cotton twill ribbon, each 2 centimeters wide and 35 centimeters long. Align the 2 ribbons at one end and insert them into the middle of the flap, ensuring the center of the ribbons aligns with the center of the flap at the marking. Insert them about 1 centimeter into the flap. Once centered, pin them in place. Then, top stitch the flap to close the opening and secure the ribbons in place with the stitching. You can choose to stitch between the marks or start from the bottom and stitch around the entire flap. Be sure to start and finish with back and forth stitches. Now that the stitching is done, I made sure to use a coordinated thread in the spool to match the fabric and in the bobbin to match the terry cloth color. Next, I just need to close the flap of the pouch, separate the 2 ribbons, and wrap each ribbon around the pouch in opposite directions. After that, bring the ribbons to the front and tie them. If needed, you can trim the ribbons to adjust their length. These 2 ribbons not only serve to close the pouch, but they can also be used to suspend the pouch by tying the 2 ends of the ribbons together, creating a suspension loop. Here's another option. Close the flap of the pouch with a round elastic cord loop and a button. Cut a small piece of round elastic cord about 6 centimeters long, then fold it in half. Insert the two ends, ensuring they are well secured together, at the center marking of the flap of the pouch. To keep the ends together before inserting them, you can wrap a piece of sewing thread around the ends to hold them in place. Pin the cord to keep it secured, then top stitch the flap right at the opening, or, as an option, around the entire perimeter at 2 millimeters from the edge, making sure to reinforce the stitching at the beginning and end with back and forth stitches. Now, the elastic cord forms a secure tie loop. You can reinforce it with a few back and forth stitches at the cord to ensure it stays in place during use. Next, we will fold down the top of the pouch and mark the position for the button. Then, sew a button that is 10 to 15 millimeters in diameter onto the marked spot. This pouch with an elastic cord loop and button can also be hung up if desired. The elastic cord makes it stretchable and practical for use, allowing you to easily hang or carry the pouch as needed. And there you have it. Your Nikko Care set is complete. The patterns are easy and quick to sew. We now have several pieces for your skincare and makeup removal routine, and these are also products that you can easily take with you when traveling. I even managed to pack my solid soap and shampoo for a weekend trip. We hope that you'll be just as happy with your creations. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and subscribe to our channel. We can't wait to see your version, so head over to Instagram with #EkatiNikko. See you soon, Arikati.